We are going to be speaking with Stephanie Kelton, who's a professor of public policy and economics at Stony Brook University and one of the world's leading experts in modern monetary theory. Unfortunately, due to a technical issue, as I would call it, we lost the first bit of the conversation with her. So I'm introducing her to you now, and we're going to join the conversation in progress.
If Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have decided that, the 4 bills that have been passed so far, that's enough, that's sufficient, we're going to close up and go home. We're not going to do anything that's going to add to the deficit further. We're beginning to worry about the debt. And you're going to leave state and local governments out to dry. You're going to, there's a number of other things, but have to tell you, that's the one that concerns me the most, because you're already hearing governors tell you they're very candid about what the consequences will be if they don't get aid from the federal government. They're going to start cutting the public workforce, firefighters, teachers, police officers, essential services. Everything is going to be cut, and it's going to be cut deeply. They're going to be 20%, 30% cuts, more layoffs. And so what Congress is trying to do to put some kind of a floor under the slowdown and, to provide some support for this economy is going to be completely undone when you get 50 little Herbert Hoovers running around all over this country, working with their state legislatures to slash budgets. So
now, along those lines, the unemployment insurance system, these are state systems which they're independently operated. Some, you file by phone, some website. The systems are sort of functioning to different degrees depending on how overwhelmed and modern they are. We've got the federal supplements for unemployment insurance of up to $600 a week. We're starting to hear that there are state governors saying, we can only really maintain the state benefits for so long before those run out, as they say. What is your perspective on what needs to be done in that sense?
Well, a couple of things. The mistakes have already been made in the sense that once you allow people to become unemployed, then the way that you're left to deal with them is through unemployment insurance. And the thing that happened after the Great Recession, you probably remember, is that people who went on unemployment insurance then had the unemployment insurance. That period of time runs out, and then it expires, and now you don't have anything, and then you have to go back, and Congress has to fight and negotiate and pass a small extension, and then it turns out not to be long enough. And you got all these people who became long-term unemployed. 26 weeks and more. Many people were jobless for a year or more in that environment, and the benefits run out and all of the associated problems. So it would have been, I just want to say, it would have been much, much better to have an effective paycheck protection program in place that allowed employers to keep hold of their workers, keep them on payroll, avoid letting them slide into unemployment, and then have this system, which, as you described, is antiquated. You've got people who are reporting that they've made 1,000 phone calls a day to try to apply to get in the queue for unemployment insurance. So, what happens when it runs out? Well, I guess we hope for the best in terms of Congress being willing to extend unemployment insurance as needed, or people are just going to be left with no income at all.
And that's fundamentally, that's how it would have to be managed, right? It would have to be managed where the Treasury says we are going to fund these state programs, or we will make up anything that the states are unable to pay. That's the mechanism.
Right. And as we've just been, that's exactly right. What you have is a situation where the federal government sits in a unique position as the issuer of the currency. It can't run out of money. State and local governments completely different. State and local governments can't issue the US dollar. They are users of the currency, which is why every mayor and every governor essentially is pleading with the federal government to come through with grants, with aid to help state and local governments, because their budgets don't work like the federal budget. And so that's exactly right. In an environment where revenues are collapsing at the state and local level, and state and local governments are dependent on tax revenue to pay the bills, whereas the federal government isn't, the federal government's going to have to step up and write the check, or we're going to end up in a situation where you have mass layoffs across the country, state public sector workers, and essentially states that are unable to bear the burden of supporting the unemployment insurance system.
I read a paper yesterday that argues that this is actually going to be much worse and last much longer than certainly the administration is willing to admit when they say it's going to go up like a rocket. Analogies to Great Depression #2. My question to you is, what are the indicators we should be paying attention to determine whether that's the direction we're going or whether in 6 or 8 months there could be a significant portion of the losses recovered?
I mean, I think we're watching the unemployment rate. I think that, you can extend loans and say that they turn into grants, but we are still relying on businesses to apply for these loans, to take some risk because it doesn't cover all of their fixed operating costs. We're essentially saying, do us a favor, help us keep people on payroll, but we're going to cover some of your fixed costs, but not all of your fixed costs through this process. So businesses that have a lease, they have rent, they have utilities, they have other fixed costs that they can't cover because they're shut down. They don't have any cash flow, right? They have no revenue. They're not going to take those loans and keep the workers on payroll if it means they also have to incur a bunch of other costs that won't be covered, that's going to come out of their bottom line. So watch the unemployment rate and watch how many of these businesses are essentially going to be gone forever. And that's the really scary thing, is small businesses really are the backbone of our economy in terms of, supporting jobs. And, I've talked with people. I got a friend out in Kansas City, and he said a few weeks ago, you could drive around and you could see signs in the business storefronts that said temporarily closed.
Right.
And he went back a few days ago, and he said the signs no longer say that. They just say out of business. They're boarding up. They're going under. So I think those are the kind of indicators that let you know that the kind of thing that you just said, that this could be orders of magnitude worse than the Great Recession, and we could end up with an economy that is deeply depressed for a long, long period of time.
Yeah, here in Boston, we've seen a shift from open for takeout and delivery to closed until further notice, which is sort of another sense of that. A couple other things just to talk briefly about before I let you go. One is the stock market. Does looking at the level of the Dow tell us anything relevant right now?
Well, it tells you a little bit, I suppose. It tells you that investors feel less
okay
okay about the degree of commitment on the part of the Fed to help maintain stock market prices. I mean, I think it's a reflection of not so much fundamentals, what we call economic fundamentals, the health of our firms and the likelihood of a solid recovery in the months ahead, but sort of confidence and a belief that at the end of the day, the Fed has your back.
I guess the question is whether that means anything for Main Street, as they like to say, because at quick glance, you see the unemployment numbers and you see the stock market doing okay. It doesn't make sense. Now, a lot of that is, how bad was it expected to get? When people go on unemployment, they do presumably get some money which they can spend, which could prop up stock market. Like, there are other factors, but how directly does it relate to the average person's experience and outlook?
Not very directly at all.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the thing. And I think investors really are mostly channeling optimism about how far the Fed is going to be willing to go to do whatever it takes to protect the largest publicly traded companies and shareholders.
Last thing, universal basic income. There is a movement now. So universal basic income, I guess, as prominent as it has ever been, probably mostly thanks to Andrew Yang's candidacy in the Democratic primary. There are a lot of conversations now which seem to go along the lines of, hey, we clearly can afford to do what Andrew Yang suggested, and we've clearly determined it's a good idea. We being, I guess, our legislators, lawmakers. Others saying there's really nothing here. These are extenuating emergency circumstances. These are one-time payments, even if it's renewed one more time. This is not universal basic income, and it does not affect the economy in the way that a UBI would. What can we glean about UBI from this, if anything?
Well, I mean, the $1,200 check, a lot of people are saying just keep that going. And that would be a form of, a basic income payment.
Yes.
Again, even with the $1,200 check, there is means testing. Not everybody is going to receive that check. With the Yang proposal, remember that, that proposal was tied to a whole series of if-thens. So if you want to opt into this program, then check the math and make sure that if you're receiving other forms of public support, if you're on food stamps or, there were a range of public programs that if you're a beneficiary, you need to decide whether you want to continue to receive those benefits or let those benefits go and take essentially what's behind door number two, which
Although I think later on it became changed to be additive, although I don't, now I'm not remembering.
No. It was additive in the sense that if you're not on any government program,
okay,
you get it. If you are on certain government programs like Social Security, it was additive to that, but it wasn't additive to the whole package, the whole suite of programs. Okay. So, but look, a basic income right now or an income supplement to people makes perfect sense to me. Makes perfect sense to me in this moment that you need to get cash into people's hands. You got all these cars, you got thousands and thousands of cars of people, families lining up at the food banks, right? People aren't at the food bank because the grocery store is out of food. They're at the food bank because the bank account is out of money.
Yes.
And so in this situation, direct payments on a recurring basis for a period of time make perfect sense to me.
You don't necessarily think this tells us anything about the long-term idea of UBI?
No, not really. I mean, look, if we just did this conversation where I said, suppose we were in the fall of 2019.
Yes.
If we're in the fall of 2019 and we were talking about sending every person in this country, which there is a proposal, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib has a proposal to send, I think it's $2,000, right, to every single person in this country for a period of time. Now, that's a universal basic income payment over a period of time. Suppose we had talked about doing that in the fall of last year when the unemployment rate was 3.5%. And I think that most people would have said, there's your inflation invitation, right? Because in that economic environment, people had jobs, people were already had income to spend. And on top of that, you're going to layer 4,000, 8,000 per household, depending on the number of people in the house. I think it's a very different question in that economic environment.
We've been speaking with Stephanie Kelton, professor of public policy and economics at Stony Brook University. Stephanie, really appreciate your time once again.
Thanks for having me.